Joining me now from here in Washington is environmental justice advocate Kari Fulton. So Kari, as we heard in this story, more than 90 species could be affected by this border wall. Other than migration patterns, what are some of the other issues that come into play?
Of course, migration patterns, as well as the development of ecosystems. If you're building a huge wall, how does that break up the actual land when you're placing in inorganic materials into a land, and how does that deal with land dwelling animals, the ones that are under the ground? How does that impact them? You also have to think about the destruction of property that is not really ours. We're talking about building a wall on top of indigenous land. And what does that mean for indigenous sovereignty rights? What does this also mean when we're talking about connecting and keeping families connected? Because we're building a huge wall that divides not just the borders, but also our families. So many people live and they breathe on those border lines, and it's a huge burden.
We know that this deterioration has been going on for many years now under various administration. It doesn't appear that it has been a priority. So how can it become one? And do you think it will become one under President Biden?
The hope is that it will become something that is a priority for the next administration, or for this administration and continuing administrations, because we want to know that our environment is something that is prioritized, and that's something that we've seen with some of the language around climate change. We also need to see it around some of the land rights and reclamation as well.
So what kind of U.S. government actions can start to turn this around? I mean, could it be taking down the borders or the barriers? And should it be up to individual border states to find the solutions here and not the federal government? What about Mexico in all of this?
Those are all major questions that I think the administration is trying to figure out as well. I think the first step they did with the executive order of halting construction and making sure that taxpayers are not paying for the construction of this wall was a great first step. And I think that we'll have to figure out new solutions as we talk about immigration reform and how we can work together with our sister nations. Mexico is our neighbor and should be considered our friend. We have to figure out better ways to partner together and to figure out ways of how we have a border that is protected and secure, but also allows for our ecology and our families to thrive and survive.
Kari, you touched on this a moment ago, but aside from the animals, what are some other environmental issues to consider when you talk about construction? You're also bringing in materials, machines. What are some other concerns?
You're talking about bringing in materials, you're talking about bringing in machines, you're talking about increasing energy usage at the border. So all of those things are impacting communities. And you're also bringing in, we see this in other forms of major construction projects, whether you're talking about building a pipeline or a border wall. You start to bring in more of these workers who are transient workers, who may not have an existing relationship to the community, and they might not always protect the community as well. And that is a huge problem where we're seeing very large issues of women and girls being violated in these areas where you have worker camps close to these major projects where there are worker camps. So that's a huge issue that also needs to be addressed. And that could be addressed by building projects that are more locally inspired and locally engaged and locally empowered.
All important things to consider. Kari Fulton, thank you so much for joining us.